People living along the U.S. Gulf Coast are marking a milestone anniversary. It has been 20 years since Hurricane Katrina made landfall. Wow. Remember these images, right? 20 years later, the storm still stands at the top of the list of costliest natural disasters in U.S. history. It left more than 1,800 people dead, millions of people without a home, flooding more than 80% of the city of New Orleans after the levees failed and the water just rushed in. Hurricane Katrina changed that region forever. This morning, we are joined from there by Renee Brunet, who is in New Orleans, who's a New Orleans resident and meteorologist. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Firstly, I cannot believe it has been 20 years. You grew up in New Orleans. When the storm hit the city, you were in Montreal, I understand, but your family was there, your friends were there. Take us back to that day 20 years ago.
It was scary. I was at the time working for Environment Canada, and I saw it on the way 3 days in advance, and was warning all of my family and friends that they might want to think about getting out because it looks very different from many of the other storms that threatened the area. And indeed it was. That Sunday evening, my mom and dad and the rest of the family finally decided to leave the city literally hours before the storm struck. And it's a lucky thing they did because, as you see in those images right there, my mom and dad's house was under 5 meters of water, so much deeper than the images that you see right there.
5 meters of water.
Yeah.
So when the water subsided, what was left of their home?
Well, that's the other weird thing. Because New Orleans is mainly below sea level by many, many meters, there is no way for the water to naturally recede out of the city, which means it had to be manually pumped out by the Army Corps of Engineers, and that took 2 full months. And so people's homes, like my parents, sat underwater for nearly 2 full months, which means during that time in September, right after the storm, and into October, it's still pretty hot and pretty humid down here, which means black mold started to grow, which means that many homes that maybe sustained the water and the wind and remained standing were now not salvageable because they're filled with black mold everywhere. And as a result, tens of thousands of homes, including my parents, had to be demolished after the storm. They were not salvageable.
Were they able to rebuild?
Actually, my mom and dad were stuck living at my brother's house for a full 2 years after the storm because they had nowhere else to go because insurance money, whether it be from personal insurance or federal, didn't come along until about 2 years after. My mom and dad did buy the shell of a house that was not demolished after the storm, more than 2 years after the storm, and that is still where my mother lives to this very day.
Wow. You know, after the storm, New Orleans lost more than, what, half of its population? Researchers found that a year later, a third of people had not gone back. How has the city coped with this dramatic drop in population?
Indeed, nearly half of the population never came back to the city because people were all evacuated out for months and months and reestablished their lives elsewhere. So when it was finally okay to come back once all the water was evacuated, people just didn't come back. I think something like 450,000 people never came back to New Orleans. And as a result, you know, we don't think about it, but who runs a city? Who are policemen and firemen and bartenders and servers and do all the other jobs that exist in any area? People. And so when you have nearly half of those people, everything gets downsized. I remember Mardi Gras the following year and several years was very much consolidated into a small area because we simply didn't have the resources. And businesses that maybe survived the storm could not survive the fact that there were just no people to operate those businesses. So the city very much downsized in that time.
So Renee, I can't imagine. But, you know, it's 20 years have passed. When you walk around the city today, what do you see? What does it look like?
I see a city that is definitely back. Don't get me wrong. I've been back. I lived in Montreal for a long time, but I came back home about 13 years ago. So I've been back for a while, and I have watched the city come back in a major way. With that being said, If you walk around or drive around, I should say, the city outside of the downtown corridor and the Fringe Quarter, there are still many homes that are standing with that big X that was put on the Army Corps of Engineers on the outside of homes that signified that they were inspected and how many dead people were found in the building. That is still alive in some places. You can still visit some of the levees that breached and find, you can clearly see where the breached area was and where it was repaired. But the good news is that a lot of infrastructure has been improved since then. Levees have been improved and reinforced. A lot of underground drainage has been improved and enlarged. As a matter of fact, we had another major hurricane that struck us on August 29th, just 4 years ago.
That's right.
Ida.
Right.
And the good news is that not a single levee broke during Ida. We did have significantly more wind damage, though, because Ida was indeed a stronger hurricane than Katrina. But the levees didn't breach. And thank goodness for that, because I don't think the city would have been able to survive that again.
Well, listen, I cannot believe it's been 20 years. Thank you so much, Renee Bernay, for taking us back and looking at that 20 years ago and what New Orleans looks like today. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
If you like that video, make sure to subscribe to the Your Morning YouTube feed, where you can find all kinds of new content posted every weekday morning.